They're all over. Ever seen like they're all over. Ever seen like
All right. Good afternoon. This City Commission workshop. Sorry, I just have something in my throat. I promise it's not. It's a bad time to have a sore throat. All right, the City Commission workshop regarding the Flagler Avenue parking study will come to order. Please silence your cell phone. City Clerk, if you would call the roll, please.
Mayor Owen,
Yes, here.
Vice Mayor Colodi,
Here.
Commissioner Hartman,
Here.
Commissioner McGurk,
Here.
Commissioner Sacks.
And here.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we dive in, I got a question from my commission, but just to kind of set the stage. So this is the second, I would say, meeting in probably what will turn out to be several different ones like this. This is obviously a complex issue, a lot of people interested, all of us are interested. We as a commission, we had a public workshop that was held last month on Flagler Avenue by staff. But as a commission, we have not really, we've talked about some of these in kind of one-off, 5 seconds here and there, but we as a commission have never really even talked about these. So I couldn't tell you on all of the different things that have been proposed and talked about. I don't really know where the commission stands. So this is our first chance as a commission to talk about the work that staff has done and some of the proposals that staff has brought up. And so that leads me to my question for the commission. We always like to start out with public participation because, again, we're here to represent public. My question for the commission is that there may be items the public's here to speak about that by the time we finish talking, they may realize, they're in complete agreement with where we are. So I thought about us having some discussion first and then having public participation after that, still having a time for folks to chat, but that way they know kind of where we stand as an initial, we've kind of given some initial viewpoints. But the danger of that is I never want to cut the public short, and we do have a hard stop at 5:30 on this meeting. So I could go either way, gentlemen. Does anybody have anything to add to that? Any comments or anything to add to that? Yes, no, love it, hate it. Vice Mayor, what are your thoughts?
As long as we leave, I like the idea of talking a little bit about it first, but I don't want to put the public comments off till last. I'd like to see them, maybe delay them a half hour or something like that. That way they can get the flavor of what we're saying.
Okay, Commissioner Sacks, thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Public comment is essential today, so I would like to hear from them.
Do it first, all
I'm
right.
sure they'd like us to hear from them.
Comments, what do you, I hate to put everybody on the spot. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do it here.
I'm flexible. I think it makes a lot of sense that they get an idea of what we may be feeling before we hear from them. But on the other hand, it's kind of, I don't know if we want to keep them that long, but they were committed. So
I don't
have an opinion one way or the
All
other.
right, so let's just leave it as this. Let's do public participation now, but just know that we haven't had a chance to speak. So we may agree with you all, we may not. We'll try to get to that. Hopefully you all leave us a little time to discuss. If not, we'll have another meeting. We'll just keep going. So with that, we'll open it for public participation. I'll say this as a reminder to everyone. It's a 3-minute time limit. There's a clock up there. There's a lot of folks that want to speak. We would like to speak as well, so please abide by the 3 minutes. Don't make me be rude and have to cut you off. Stop when the 3 minutes is up. Also, a lot of passions in the room. People care about this. You may hear something you agree with. Please don't applaud. You may hear something you disagree with. Please don't boo. Don't throw things at people. Let's just be professional, and we'll hear each other out and then have a civil discussion. So with that, if you'd like to speak, you can come to the podium, give your name. Deb's going to show you how to do it. Deb's an old pro with this. Give your name, address, and last thing I'd say, Deb, before you begin, we're the ones that you're talking to, not the audience. So speak to us. Don't turn and address people in the audience. Just direct it to the commission. It works best. Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
We can.
I can't hear me.
Just give your name and address.
Deborah Dugas, 200 North Pine Street. Mayor and Commissioners, I'm here for public record to show that I've submitted 2 petitions for your consideration. I submitted the petitions to the city clerk yesterday. I'm now speaking for the people who signed the petitions and giving you feedback from my conversations with them. The first petition was for a stop sign to be placed at North Pine Street between Flagler Avenue and Crawford Road. I have had a I'm trying to hurry.
That's all right.
Petition signed by 11 of the 13 homes with permanent residents on North Pine Street. I also had the residents on the corners of the North Pine, but facing another street, sign, as I felt the stop sign would have major impact on their residents. There are 22 total signatures on the petition. Each signer was asked for the exact placement they would like to see for the stop sign. 4 said due east, all others said they did not care as long as one was added. Due east seems logical as there is a crosswalk there. It was also requested that the stop bars at the intersections be repainted as they're not clearly seen. Not on my petition, but on the minds of signers were speed humps. Not like Magnolia, but real speed humps. Many North Pine residents as well as other signers really wanted those. I did not bring that up, they did. That is a battle for someone else. Just give us a stop sign for now. The second petition, with signatures that have been added in the last 2 weeks, was submitted earlier to the previous commission but was ignored. I canvassed the neighborhood surrounding Flagler Avenue to get input on issues from the previous parking meeting. This took a lot of time because folks were happy to share their frustrations. Issues of concern were delivery trucks, trash trucks, speeding, illegally parked cars, and parking in general. When I mentioned a possible truck route which would prohibit large delivery trucks on the surrounding residential streets, I was happy to hear that folks readily welcomed this, and I was not the only one. Some concerns voiced to me were delivery trucks and buses with engines left running, giving off fumes for up to an hour at a time as they deliver to several businesses. Back-to-back trucks parking, cars and trucks speeding, as well as blocking driveways. The major concern of residents is their safety and quality of life in the neighborhood. Some concerns I heard were, why should their taxes go for parking garages or parking lots for businesses, which have doubled in size, knowing they did not have adequate parking? Concerns about merchants and employees taking up customer parking space and then saying there's no parking for customers. There was some concern over parking meters. There was a definite no to a parking garage in the Flagler area, especially the shuffleboard courts. It was also brought up that many businesses have expanded and liquor sales seating without adding parking required to accommodate customers. I did not get to many of the residences as I had hoped because I got tired and was not sure my efforts would be worth it. As recommended by commissioners, I submitted these petitions on behalf of the residents of the community.
Thank you, Deb. Next, who else would like to speak? Please come ahead. If you plan on speaking after Lisa, if you can come down, there's some spots on the front. So if you're not already near the front, come down to those so we can move this as quickly as possible. Lisa, please.
Lisa Martin, 618 South Pine Street. Just 2 things, reading through the agenda, I was sad to see no reference to the parking overlays, and I wonder if we are considering removing those parking overlays in Flagler and Canal Street areas. And the other one is, as in many locations, employees park away from the businesses. And again, I did not see any reference to perhaps opening up parking for customers by moving employees to a different area. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, come ahead.
I'm Richard Wanson, 204 Prestwick Drive. I'm the new president of the Coronado Mainland Shuffleboard Club. It was our understanding that there's been some discussion of tearing the shuffleboard club down and for a parking garage. Just like to give you a little background on who we are. We're a conglomeration of actually 3 clubs. One in Edgewater, which was damaged by a hurricane and is now a parking lot. The Mainland Club, which is right over there now in a parking lot. And so I think you can see where we're coming from when we get a little, when we hear about parking in our club. We have about 350 active members. We have 7 people in the Hall of Fame. We have 20 pros who play out of the club. We have a couple hundred players who play for fun. We play 6 days a week, 2 nights a week, year round. We have social members that play cribbage. They play mahjong. We do community events. We work with the Sparks group for Down syndrome adults. Will be playing at the courts tomorrow night. We try to do as much as we can for the community. We are very active. We're in a National Historic Area, and I know you folks are aware of that. And I urge you to not look to tear down iconic places like this. There are very few of them left. And I'm afraid if we do that, we'll be nothing but a strip mall with good beach access. So thank you very much. If you have any questions for us, I'll be happy to talk to any of you at any time. Thanks.
Thank you. While the next person's coming, come ahead. Just to clarify, I think this is important to note, you mentioned early on, there's been some discussion around putting a garage where the shuffleboard courts are and tearing them down. And in reality, the only thing that's happened is that's what today is for, because the only thing that's happened is we challenge staff to say, look at all these possible options, outline every possible option. And so then that's what today is about, is trying to outline those. So just don't want that going out in the community that there's been discussion, that's what today is. But yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Stephen Welfer. I'm at 222 Flagler Avenue. After extensive review and many meetings, my personal view is one of them is the LDR 604.09. What it relates to is buildings existing at the effective date of this code may be modernized, altered, or repaired, provided there is no increase in floor area capacity and there is no change of occupancy without providing additional off-street parking and loading facilities. So we've continued to allow bars and restaurants, which I love them all. God knows I love them all. But we've allowed them to go from a 40-seat coming in as a coffee shop to 150 seats with alcohol and zero parking. This is our parking problem right here. It's not the people parking on Flagler to walk to the beach. It's not even the people who work at the shops parking on Flagler in front of their place, even though that is a problem. They should know better. But this right here, 604.09, is our biggest problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? All right. Yep. One more. Again, if you want to speak after him, come to one of these front seats. I'm going to shut it off real quick. Yes.
Randy Herman, 108 Esther Street. I would greet you as my grandson called yesterday and said, bump, elbow, kick. As we face the virus. One of the things that I've been thinking about is, does this virus have anything good to bear for us as a world community? And I guess one of the things I've been thinking about is it is really asking us to think about density and what density means as far as our health. And we have been in favor of density, and many cities around the world are dealing with the issues of density. Many of the suggestions that are coming before you today have been put forth at least for the last 7 years, off and on in different task force, starting with the parking task force. So some of them are quite original that have come forth today, but some are repeated, and there's a certain amount of frustration about things that get repeated and yet not action. I would ask you to consider the issue, the more complex issue of our state, county, and city relationship, and really urge us to look at using the land behind the Marine Discovery Center as a parking center, particularly for special events. I noticed tonight at the City Commission meeting there's requests for street closures, but most of them have no parking plan at all. So we at least know if we approve those kinds of large events, we could start using that land with the shuttle service. We already have a business in town that's willing to do it. So I know we have thought about a lot of things, but it seems to me we've got to think a little bit bigger because of the other issues that will obviously come to bear as we move forward. So I would ask you to look at the issues of the city, the county, and even the state, and finding a larger plan, particularly for the large events, because the crowds aren't going to go away unless this virus gets really bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Wondering how you're going to link the virus to parking, but you did it, so I'm impressed.
My name is Arlene Jabot, and I live at 662 Middlebury Loop. I'm the treasurer for Coronado Mainland Shuffleboard, and I just have a quick comment I want to make, that I would like my fellow shufflers and the neighboring community and the support of the to support the retaining and retain the ambiance of Flagler Avenue. Our shuffleboard courts and daily activity on them are an attraction that cannot be replaced with a parking garage or parking lot. Locals and visitors love stopping, relaxing on the benches, watching us play, learning how to play, and eventually joining us and moving to the new Smyrna Beach area. We need everybody's support because we want to retain our club.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Holthouse. I live at 918 Magnolia Street. This whole meeting has been a major discussion in my class. I teach middle school and high school students, and we're learning civics. And today's discussion was about the parking garage, and I have a lot of little grommies who like to skateboard and whatnot, and they were very upset. They've been born and raised here. And they said, what's going to happen to Go Juice? What's going to happen to this? What's going to happen to that? I said, you know what, eventually, with all that traffic that's coming in, you know that the beach is already closed by 10 a.m. because there's no more flow onto the beach. It's already occupied. They're going to be filtering also into the garages. You're going to have more traffic going across that bridge to either go to the hotels or the restaurants or to the beach and to our parking garage. So eventually, they're going to lose their right to skateboard and to ride their bikes and to do everything else. And eventually, what's going to happen is that our locals are not going to be able to go to the beach anymore. So I hope that you don't put another parking garage there and take away the charm that we have. I've said this before. I've moved here for my kids so they can live in a nice, quaint area because it reminded me of Cape Cod, and it was quaint and quiet. I could ride my bike with my kids to their school when they were in elementary school. And I just want something left for them. The more cement you put up there, we're going to look like Daytona. Please just reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Linda Mays, and I live at 1426 Beacon Street. Dave and I moved into the house on Beacon Street about 10 months ago. Before then, lived on Evergreen, and I never thought much about the corner of Faulkner and what becomes Washington. You all know where I mean. Until now, when I go to any place, I go down Peninsula, and I stop at that red light, and I turn right to go over to the bridge, this way to go to the Publix, up here to get a bite to eat. I'm there constantly. And it is such a crowded corner. I don't see how somebody hasn't been killed on that. The pedestrians don't understand the lights, and it took me a while to understand those lights too. So they don't know. They'll see a red over here and they go, and it's not a red for them, it's a red for over here. This is the whole situation. Then you get Wine Week. Need I say more? And they travel in groups. And then you have those who have to get over to Riverview, Old Riverview Charlie's, and so that's another problem. Now, I realize all of this is responsibility of the Navy and the county and everybody else, but we've got to take some responsibility for it and try to do something to improve that and make that a safer place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you go, just make sure I'm clear, was that the intersection of Peninsula and Flagler you were talking about?
Or Washington
Or-
and Faulkner.
Okay. I just Washington, you said Washington and Faulkner at one point, but most of what you were, yeah, up here, yeah. But Peninsula, Flagler is where you're saying there's confusion, and that's the one you kind of go out daily, yeah, okay, got it. Just
Clarify. Ms. Mays, I just want to clarify, yours was a safety issue at the intersection? Yes. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
I'm Rob Leonard. Been a veterinarian here in town for about 35 years, and I did have my practice on the North Causeway, so I've seen the traffic situation through the rebuilding of 3 bridges. the refurbishing of 2 bridges that were rebuilt. And I've watched out the front window of my office every year how much further the traffic backs up. And we talk a lot, and this is a parking workshop, I understand that, to talk about parking without putting traffic at the top of the list. I think we're missing the big boat. You have a 2-lane road that is closed for 12 to 14 minutes, twice an hour, asking it to carry all the traffic from Flagler south to 3rd Avenue and from Flagler north to Beachway and Crawford Beach approaches. I have a couple of questions because I'm not familiar with the relationship and the interaction with the county in the city when it comes to opening an additional ramp or 2 further to the south. Now, I know that was attempted not long ago, and it got shut down pretty quickly because of objection of residents in the area. I would have to think there would be a beach approach at some point that goes between 2 condos, and there's several streets down there that are very wide, and the only traffic up and down those streets are those that go into the vertical parking spaces of the individual condos on each side of that street. Now, I don't know what we have to do working with the county to get permission to do something like that, but I think we were well on our way for an additional entrance ramp until, again, my understanding, one person in particular, at least got all the press, was able to get that stopped in its tracks. So I think you have a 5-lane road coming in. Once you get over the big bridge, you've got 2 lanes on each side and a turn lane. It seems like to me anything we can do to shift traffic that way would certainly help with the parking. If we have all that traffic coming down Flagler only to find out there's no place to go, then they're all on Peninsula or they're on Atlantic or they're cutting through our neighborhoods. So signage at the west end of town, letting people know you either have to have a prepaid pass at Beachway and Crawford to get on, and all other traffic be sent in that direction. I think if we start addressing traffic, some of the parking issues may fall into place. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, seeing none. We're going to close public participation and begin the workshop. So yeah, we're going to start off. Brian's got a little bit of a presentation, recap a little bit of what we talked about at the last one, and then we'll get into commission comments. Cool. Kelly.
I'll go ahead and get started while waiting on that. So just a lot of folks here in the audience, as well as the mayor and commissioners, heard our presentation at the February 18th public meeting. We did it again on March 3rd for the Flagler Avenue Business Association meeting, as well as got their input. So I'm not going to go over that in detail. I'm going to hit the highlights and the survey results. So staff has done a lot of research on this, going back, looking at past studies, past agenda items, a lot of data collection. We divided Flagler into 10 zones. We counted those zones on 2 weekends, one in May, one in October for a wine walk. That showed we have a total of 1,168 parking spaces in those 10 zones. Interestingly, 715 of those were either restricted in some way, private, gated, tow away, and 453 were open to the public. So just perspective of what parking is out there. The overall maximum in those counts at any moment in time was 60%. So it's individual lots, some of them were quite full, but the overall maximum was 60%. One of the big challenges, as we've talked about at the meetings, is simply defining what the problem is. Is there a problem? When does it happen? What is the nature of it? How severe is it? Is it going to get worse? And that's difficult because it doesn't even address, okay, what are the solutions? So this is where our survey shed, here we go, thanks Michelle. Those are the 10 zones I just spoke about, just on Flagler there. So key questions. This next slide, this is really important. Is there a problem? 93% said yes. What is it? Lack of capacity was dominant. So there was a clear consensus that we do have a problem. That problem is a lack of parking capacity. And there was pretty clear consensus that it's most severe and happens on weekends and special events. That one was a little bit mixed. Some felt like it was a little bit more often, as in daily. Some felt like it's a little bit less weekends or maybe just sporadically. So we looked at 6 potential solutions.
I just want to clarify, you could select more than one option in this survey result. That's why you see more than 100% survey response.
So we got input from 2 groups, which I'll get to in a moment. So we looked at 6 potential strategies, totally objective, collected data on it to report to the commission. Here's what you can do in these areas. So very quick, the first was new surface lots. And let me go back real quick to answer that question is we have a problem that 93% said there is a problem, but when we get into the rest of this, you're going to see that there wasn't any one solution that had more than 50% support by both the public and the Flagler businesses. Puts the commission and the public in a very difficult spot. Everybody thinks there's a problem. There's no consensus, even 50% shared on what one solution could be, with one exception being the shuttle, which I'll get to. So that's the gap that we're talking about today. So real quick, surface lots, we looked at 32 potential lots. You could build small parking lots, add parking immediately. This would be assets for the city. That was supported strongly by the businesses, more so than the residents. Businesses were more than 50%. Residences were about 39%. Combined was 43%. Parking garages, a lot of talk about that. We just looked at 3 possible locations. One was the Coronado Civic Center shuffleboard courts. One was at Cooper and Flagler. The other one was off this map down at 3rd Avenue in Atlantic. Parking garages, very expensive. The most ability to get capacity, at, a large amount of capacity. The Coronado location would have up to 350 parking spaces, for example, but it would cost $9 million by our estimates. Parking garages had much higher public support at 61%, had very low business support at 18%. A big gap there on garages. It was interesting there. And our data is not scientific. It's a small sample size. It was based on who was there and how they interpreted the questions that were asked. You've seen this before. This is at Flagler and Pine. This kind of showed what the parking garage could be. That's a 2-level, and that is a 3-level parking garage. Already needs to have the vegetation trimmed a little bit there. But just in perspective, 1st floor retail to preserve kind of the storefront along Flagler. That's what it could be at that location. As for garages, moving along to education and enforcement, it's kind of an overall topic, had 42% support. But I do want to talk about metering. A lot of talk in the community about that. So metering, why it's proposed is that the spaces immediately in front of businesses should be used for high turnover parking for customers of those businesses. So the goal with metering is to free up parking and turn it over, not to make money for the city. Right now, we've got a 4-hour limit. People are coming there, going to the beach, staying all day. Sometimes employees park there. So metering is a good mechanism to create a structure to get that turnover. Metering was not very popular by the businesses. It was popular at 53% with the public. Just an interesting note on metering, we did meet with the canal businesses on that because we talked about it. They were also opposed to metering for the most part. So one topic that did get a lot of support was the shuttle. This has been around for a long time. Our staff thought that if we're going to propose a shuttle, it needs to be something very cool, interesting, hip, that with a vehicle that looks like something like this, that would be fun and people look forward to getting on and off of. That could have a parking area at the Marine Discovery Center, at the AOB site, or another location, and it could go back and forth. It could eventually go around the loop. But surprisingly, the shuttle had a total of 68% said they would be interested in offering a shuttle service. And I'm going to move forward to show some of the loops. Strategy 5 out of 6, designated loading and unloading zones. Also an issue with a lot of discussion. What's shown here, and it's hard to see on this map, but they're basically was identified as 8 locations where you could stripe and sign those to have temporary loading and unloading only during a certain period in the morning hours. And then for the remainder of the day, they would be on-street parking spaces. So you convert existing parking spaces for that. It'd be relatively cheap to do this. You could start with 2 or 4 of them, see how it works, and expand it from there, or go back to the way it was. There's some advantages and disadvantages. You know, this would allow options for trucks to pull off the roadway, load and unload out of the traffic stream. Getting the businesses to comply with that would be a challenge. That did not get a lot of support from the businesses. Interestingly, that's this next slide here. This is one where there was a pretty big discrepancy. You know, is it a problem, delivery trucks? Public meeting was yes, 45%. Businesses were yes at only a 12% rate. And that could be, you know, we were mixing this into a parking discussion, and this is somewhat of an operational issue. Folks could have answered this in the broader context of parking maybe, and not necessarily whether it's a nuisance. Last strategy, I'm going through this quickly, is the business owner potential actions, just things they can do to better manage their own parking, shared parking, charging for special events. The survey showed these issues were not really supported by the businesses except for using kind of best practices for employee parking. That was supported by the public as well as the businesses. And that is a very brief overview of our data collection and survey results.
Thank you, Brian, and all the team that worked on that. A lot of time and effort put into that and the discussion. I think you said it well. Someone lost a pair of sunglasses, right? So I think you said it well. That the challenge is pretty universal agreement. Something should be done. Almost no agreement on what that should be, and that's the fun job that we all get, gentlemen. So with that, I would open it for discussion, questions from the commission. Jump in.
Brian, question, please. Have you compared our situation, our size, our constraints, traffic flow to any other beachside communities? And what actions have they taken, if you've looked?
We have, and we've looked at many for all of these issues, especially metering, trolleys. It varies is the answer. I think metering is an emerging practice in many coastal cities and urbanized areas that have high demand for a limited amount of parking to help them manage their parking. But that does vary. There are places that still have it free and they're happy with it and it works for them. Some places, St. Augustine has had success with parking garages. So it really does vary. There's not one particular match that we looked at that, some are more progressive than others. A city of Asheville, North Carolina, one of the Flagler merchants referred us to them, really liked some of the things they were doing. A comprehensive strategy seems to be successful in places, not just picking out one thing and going with it, is really exploring all of these and find what best fits us.
Have you looked at enforcement in any of comparable cities or studied it in our own city?
We've looked at, yes, in other cities, and that is an issue that came up often as far as how to enforce more. I think we have some suggestions in the report on how to do that. I think Chief can talk about how difficult the 4-hour max to enforce that without any technology is a manual operation. And where an officer has to see a car pull in, somehow record when it pulled in and where, and then know to come back and see if it was over or not. Labor intensive.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian.
Chalking tires has been ruled constitutionally illegal, by the way. Yeah. Go Google it. It's pretty fascinating. Vice Mayor Colodi.
I have a number of comments, but I'd like to do them by subject.
Okay.
And carrying on with this particular subject here, on the parking meters. I've thought a lot about this, and I've been to a number of places that have meters and garages. One of the things I would like to see with the change in technology on parking meters, you can set them to do a lot of things for you. and they're not necessarily labor intensive once they're in place. One concept that I was looking at is you could put parking meters out there activated by either your credit card, your cell phone, or whatever technology works, and allow 2 hours of parking for free. Have no charge for the first 2 hours. Make it $1 for the next hour after that. Once they hit 3 hours, charge them $20. That would equal what the parking lots charge down there. And it would prohibit business owners from having their employees park on the streets, whether in front of their own business or someone else's. It would also discourage people who are going to the beach from parking on Flagler Avenue. So I think that's something we should seriously look at. That is not something we can do very quickly. That would take time, but I would like to see us look into that seriously. One problem I have is I had asked when I first came on that we update the Flagler study. It took us about a year to do that. It had been around for 10 years before that, and for all practical purposes, we've done absolutely nothing. And I would like to see something done, some type of consensus as to how we can move forward, do something quickly that might have some immediate benefits, then see where to go after that. I did see the petition that came in. There are probably more names on that petition than responded to our study, and these are from all people in the neighborhood. So there is a great concern in that area by the residents to see some changes take place. I was rather disappointed watching your presentation that the business people don't really seem to want to buy into solving a problem that the rest of the town seems to have. If you could, I took a note in the very beginning, how many parking spaces are out there now?
On street on Flagler Avenue, or
How many are in your study?
1,168.
Of which 450 roughly we have control over,
Publicly accessible.
which leaves about 600 private parking spaces out there that are on private property that the public can't park on. It seems to me that this city, this commission, should be able to work with these property owners or business owners to come up with a plan to use some of those spaces. If we have to pay for it, so be it. My own opinion, a parking garage is not a solution. Definitely not on the shuffleboard courts. I'd never vote for anything to go on the shuffleboard courts. Now, you mentioned you might get 300 parking spaces in a two-story garage there,
3-story.
or three-story garage. And how much parking would be needed out of those 300 to service the new stores you're putting in place? So you really wouldn't have that much of a net gain based upon your required usage. It would definitely cut into that. Have we ever done a study to look at the uses we have now that are in the configurement that they are now to see what that parking requirement would be?
No, we haven't done, just take existing development and apply the current code and see how much more, no reductions or anything. We have not done that.
Okay, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody for not doing this. It's a very complex issue. But I think that would establish a parameter as to where we should really be going before we spend any significant amount of money on it. Just to start off with those issues.
Okay.
I think that we got to look a little bit more into that, but I would like to walk away from this meeting with some type of positive answer as to what we can look to improving when we meet at our regular meeting later on.
Okay. Gentlemen on this side, any comments at this point? Questions?
Mike, you mentioned something about getting some kind of consistency or group consensus. That's exactly the problem. That's exactly the challenge. Because so many people are here with what their personal issue is and what their problem is. We have people who absolutely oppose a parking garage. Excuse me. We have absolutely people who want a parking garage. We have we got Steve Welfer, he's here based on land development regulations for parking spaces he's been paying for 10, 12 years. We have people who want to get rid of the shuffleboard court to accommodate the parking. We have the shuffleboard court people who don't want to get rid of it. Miss Linda Mays, this is a safety issue. Rob Leonard came up and talked about traffic and opening up beach ramps. We certainly tried that, and he was right. We got a lot of pushback from the community, but we didn't just get pushback from the community on that issue. We have pushback every time we try to come up with a solution. They're not easy. Everybody's emotionally invested in what they believe and their interpretation is and what their lifestyle is in and around this community. So that in itself, to me, is the true challenge, and trying to get some kind of consensus on what the best path is to take is exactly what has been the challenge. You know, I think Rob Leonard said something right. I think we have more of a traffic issue than we have a parking issue. I think most of us, if we go down to Flagler right now, we can find a parking space. It's not easy. And we have certain times of the year where it gets terrible, holiday weekends, 4th of July, the springtime when the beach traffic comes in, very difficult. We have a business community that is not as engaged in finding solutions as they should be. So the million-dollar question here is, yes, consensus. Where do we find consensus? And we have none. And that was what happened in the past. I know Deb Dugas has been here asking about parking in front of her residential home, getting rid of that because it's a problem. And I agree with her 100%. And last year during Jake's town hall, I was able to catch up with her, and I said, Deb, where are you at with that? What are we doing? How come nothing's been done with that? And she said, well, because I know staff proposed a solution. And her response was, well, some of the people in my neighborhood and on my street want to do it and others don't. So we come back to an issue where we simply have a lack of consensus. How do we, this group up here, we've been tasked with trying to deal with this challenge. How exactly do we do that in the best way that benefits the most people? My personal opinion is I love the shuffleboard courts. I think it adds that element of charm and uniqueness that makes this town great. That's my personal opinion. However, if the consensus is that we need a parking garage, well then my personal opinion may have to be removed from that to go with the consensus. However, I will tell you that the reason that never went anywhere is because when we went down that path, the property was too small. We'd have to get rid of the Coronado Civic Center without buying the church property next to it. It just was too small, even with the shuffleboard courts. So that's where we last left that discussion, which was the parking garage in that location. The property wasn't big enough to accommodate a parking garage with or without removing the shuffleboard courts. So we have a lot of challenges, and we have some new commissioners, and I'm certainly excited about that, and I'd like to certainly hear what they have to bring to the table and, what they think that would be the best approach on this.
Okay. Brian, did any of the business merchants give you a reason why they were opposed to the meter system?
I don't remember a consensus on that. I think preservation of the free parking is something I think there's a feeling that ultimately customers will view it as they'll stay away.
But I think when you proposed that, I thought we were going to do the first couple hours free.
Well,
yeah,
we could do, but
right.
I think there's a perception, both the canal businesses and the Flagler, that this is going to make it more difficult on customers.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with my fellow commissioners is, I don't think the parking garage on Flagler is going to solve the problem because you're still going to have the traffic on Flagler to get to the parking garage. So I agree that traffic is the problem, and then what do you do with the traffic once it gets here? I think I've said before that I would certainly support the one on Third because not knowing what the county's going to do with closing, or the state's going to do about closing beaches, we may need something off-site parking for the beach traffic. So that's something we should look at long range in the future. I certainly think there are some things that we could do quickly now, the low-hanging fruit, to try to give residents a sense that we are at least doing something, and if it's not right, we can always go back and change it. I do support the shuttle system. I think, especially with the electric vehicles, and I have a recommendation at the 6:30 meeting when we get to there, so we can talk about that later. But yes, there's a perceived parking problem because you can't find a spot when you want one, but is there one all the time? Like you said, it's a hit and miss kind of thing. If you know where to park, you can find some place to park. So I think it's a never-ending issue that we're going to have to deal with in a multifaceted way. So I'm thankful for staff for all the time they put. They've given us some good information, and I think we just need to work through it and figure out what's going to work best for now. Like Randy said, in 3 or 4 months, there may not be anybody over here. We don't know. If the virus gets that bad, you're going to stop some of your tourist traffic. And I think you've said before that traffic mobility in the future will not require the parking garage because we'll be more mobile or autonomous or whatever. So we really don't know what the future is, and I hate to waste and spend the money on a parking garage that really is going to be out of service or non-functional in a few years. So that's kind of where I am. I think we need something to offset the beach parking, whether it's a parking garage or a large open lot. I certainly can support the shuttle service. I certainly, having been over there and fought with delivery trucks trying to get around them, I think we need to do something with that, either a designated truck route, freight loading, unloading, but enforcement is the key to that, whether we give them a 3-month freebie and then after that start the enforcement, but we certainly need to look at those things immediately to get something at least on the table.
Okay. So, do you have more do you want to share? You really just asked questions, so go ahead if you want to share your thoughts, then I'll go.
Yes, it's important for me to share my thoughts because this has been stewing since I've lived here, and I don't live in Zone 1. But we have similar problems in Zone 2. That's why many of the residents in Zone 2 resisted in diverting traffic to 3rd Avenue and 27th Avenue. We have a significant, somewhat different set of problems there with speeding traffic, very high volumes. So to push the traffic from Flagler either to Crawford the other direction or down to 3rd doesn't solve the problem. People who want to go to the Flagler area and that beach are going to want to go there and stay there. So to shut off or close or one-way Flagler is not the answer. What I would propose immediately, it's low-hanging fruit. I don't know how much pushback I would get, but that is enforcement, enforcement, enforcement. Our city's not going to grow. It's a barrier island. We're not going to get more sand. We're not going to get wider beaches. I oppose building parking lots on our beautiful barrier island. It's just ugly. And it doesn't solve the problem because you build a 300-car parking garage, you're just going to get 300 more cars come to the beach and park around the garage and in people's neighborhoods. And unfortunately, surface lots can only be built in the neighborhoods. That will cause more problems in the neighborhoods. So we're trying to fit a 10-size foot in a 7-size shoe. And maybe that low-hanging fruit of enforcement, if we can, it sounds almost cheaper and smarter to hire another enforcement officer to really go out there and force the delivery trucks, enforce the cars parked illegally. Maybe we'll get a better feel for what the problem is besides traffic. And we know more traffic's coming, Orlando's growing, everywhere's growing around us. But I don't want to change the character of our city. I've said it a million times before. Don't turn our city into a parking lot for a beach that's diminishing. I see that. It is diminishing at high tide. It's getting harder to park. So enforcement would be the direction I would go first.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So my thoughts just briefly, and then we'll take another pass at this. I guess I should clarify for those sitting on the edge of your seat waiting on a motion. This is just for us to talk. This is our first chance to talk. I had no clue how everybody felt about this, as they didn't how I feel. Still don't, because I haven't even spoken yet. So there will be no decisions made right now. No motions will be made. This is more kind of getting a sense of, are there things that need to just go away? We can quit talking about them, take them off the table completely, versus things that seem to have some support, and we can have staff do a little more digging, and then we can bring it back at a formal meeting. So that's kind of where we're at. So I agree with Commissioner Sachs. This problem isn't going to go away just by wishing it away. There's areas around us growing. Edgewater is growing leaps and bounds. I just went down Mission. They've cleared a whole bunch down there they're building. And I would contend, no slight to Edgewater, I lived in Edgewater many years, but folks that are living there, they're going to be in New Smyrna. They're going to spend a significant amount of their time coming up here. They're moving there because of a proximity to assets like Flagler and Canal Street, among others. So this problem isn't going to go away just by hoping that it goes away if we stick our head in the sand, in the diminishing sand. So there's a few things that I can support here today, and I'll just lay it out, and then we can move on from there. So I think the one comment that was made, I think we could do a lot better with signage, and even using some technology for signage. I came up, I was over in the middle of the state earlier this week, earlier this week. I was driving back, and I passed a sign that said, there are 12 spots available at the rest area. Somehow they're doing that. So I think we could do some things like that. So some signage out on 44 that said, here are, maybe it's not number of spaces, because on the beach, you can't count the spaces necessarily, but it says, here's the wait times at each of the beach ramps. And so it kind of funnels people, hey, I didn't know there was a ramp at this way. Let me try to go find that ramp where the wait time's only 5 minutes versus, the Flagler wait time is, 45 minutes. So I think using some digital signage and some better wayfinding, super cheap alternative to help just not have everything down kind of the one spot. So helping to address kind of that traffic thing. The shuttle that has been talked about many times, I think the option that was presented, those electric shuttles, extremely low maintenance, extremely low operation cost. The main cost is the person behind it. I would like to see us, let's try it. We could buy one of those in the used market for, maybe we buy two of them, we're in it for, 40 something grand maybe. We can sell them, we take a little bit of a hit if it doesn't work, we sell them, we lost a little bit, but let's try it. Let's try it for some special events. I would love to see us get a little bit of momentum behind it and try it. I don't think it's a huge risk to take, and I think we should at least give it a shot. And if nothing else, it puts it to bed. And that way some future commission, the next people who are sitting up here, can at least point to that experiment and say, look, it failed miserably when we tried it, versus it just keep coming up every single time. I feel sorry for staff. Y'all probably just pull the file out every time. It's come up so many times. So I'd like to see us try it. Loading, unloading zones, I support. I think that's how most major cities do this. Not that we're some major city, but I think that's how cities with this configuration do business. And so there's some concerns from the business community. I can tell you, they may not want this, but they're ready for this. They know this is coming. I've talked to many of them along Flagler. They know this is the right way to go. There's a couple that'll have to make some provisions for, the challenge that they have is they're open till 2 a.m. and they don't really open until, let's say they open at 11 o'clock, and so we want the loading zone to be closed by then. So they're going to have to figure out some way to do that. But you know what? They're businesses. They're resilient. They'll figure it out. The problem with the The parking garage, obviously, has concerns. Problem is that church property that's a lease, right? We don't own that. That property that's right there, that dirt lot that a lot of people use right there on Coronado, we lease a certain amount of spaces there, and that's coming up in, when is that? A couple of years now, right? So there's no guarantee that we'll be able to continue that lease. So that's a huge, inventory of the public spaces that could go away. So my thought is this, but I have said parking garages I think could become antiquated almost as fast as we can build it. It might become antiquated with ride sharing and autonomous vehicles. So I think if we strategically, if we had a plan and we said, look, we're in the market for some surface spaces, some surface lots, we're looking for value, and we were able to start buying some of those up, again, what's the worst that happens? We buy it up, property values haven't gone down here in the past, if you look at any 20-year period, it's gonna be a good investment. If I had money, I'd be investing in lots on beachside. So it's gonna be a good investment. We keep it, we can keep it natural, just like the church lot. We don't have to pave them, we don't have to pave Paradise, we can just buy it, let it be available. Again, better wayfinding to point folks to it. And then, worse that happens a few years, if they're not getting used, we sell them. But to Commissioner Sacks' point, if the beach, if all of a sudden parking on the beach isn't an option, I think we need some things to keep ourselves viable. Enhancing the LDRs or amending the LDRs you've talked about, I think we do have to kind of stop the bleeding. I think we should probably look at changing those to where everything from this point forward, at least, we're kind of raising that standard. So I'd look for staff's advice on that, but I could support making some changes. We've lowered that barrier to entry for business, which is good, but I think we have to eventually look at that and start raising that, acknowledging all these other challenges. And then on metering, last one, metering and enforcement. I'm going to roll those together. The problem is, enforcing the time limit, as we just talked about, if we don't deploy any other technology like a metering type solution, I can't enforce time limit on the parking. And so I'm curious and want to get your feedback on what you meant by enforcement. We can have them trolling the neighborhoods, trying to figure out, okay, is this person parked illegally? I will tell you, I've been over there during events. I've spent time during wine walks and others just rolling up and down the streets. And the challenge is, I don't know whether that car belongs at that house or whether they went to wine walk unless I see them get out and go there. So even that becomes an enforcement nightmare. So I'm all about enforcement. We either have to find it in the budget or generate a revenue source to pay for it, because we heard presentation last budget meeting about the capacity of staff. So I'm all about it if we can do it. I'm not opposed to metering. I'm not sold on it, but I'm not opposed to it. As a potential client, I'm the demographic that would love to go spend time on Flagler and Canal, and I can tell you there's times I leave my house and I don't go to Flagler because I know it's going to be a hassle to find parking because the spaces don't turn over. I want to pull up near the shop I'm at and have a space. And so the metering to me creates turnover. Right now I see it. I've been at the shuffleboard courts playing shuffleboard and watch people park and drag their chairs out and head to the beach. And so they're going to be there for 5-6 hours. So that spot now in front of the candy store or the juice store is now taken up the entire day. They should pay, they're just getting out of paying the $20. They should pay for that. So I think there's a path forward we could figure out. And every time I've talked about it, I've said they should be free for the first 3 hours or 4 hours. Like, I'm not saying that this is trying to stop right away. I'm saying we want to prohibit people kind of camping there for the entire day. So I think I covered everything. That's kind of where my head's at on everything. So some overlap with what others had said before. So we got about a half hour, so we can make kind of another pass and see where we got some. Now that everybody's heard everybody, you can kind of respond to some of those things. So, Vice Mayor, he had his hands up.
Yeah, that's good. Zone 1's my district. Flagler's in my district. The adjoining streets are in my district. I hear from these people. I hear from them frequently, and I hear them say the same things. I want to take some action now. It's been 10 or 11 years since we've been studying this. We really have to do something. We're not going to take action now, between now and 5:30. 6:30, we'll be back, and I will be making a motion to take some positive actions. I like the idea of implementing the loading, unloading zones for specific time periods. I want the commission, or the staff, to come up with a positive recommendation so we can implement it now. It's a very low-cost change, which will make a really big difference. We talk about consensus. There's a lot of diversity from people, what they see in their neighborhoods, what they would like to see. I've heard a few that focus on the traffic, which is part of the basic underlying problem. The intersections, Peninsula and Flagler, the lack of some parking at the beach, the fact the bridge goes up and down frequently. I myself, I live off the North Causeway. If I'm going to Flagler or I'm going to Publix, when I pull up at that light at Barracuda, I look at my watch. If it's 5 minutes before a half hour, or the hour, or 10 minutes after, that 15-minute period, if I'm going to that area, down the Flagler or Publix, I turn right. I go over to South Causeway. That's how serious that problem is. That would negatively impact a shuttle. I don't mind studying it, but we're talking about bringing people from where? The AOB site, which we don't want to turn into a parking lot, I've heard. Marine Discovery Center has some spaces, excess spaces. It's not in our control. We could probably work something out with them. I really wish the property owners, not necessarily the merchants, would free up their private parking for public parking, whether the city has to help them out with it. I'm more for that. We could double the amount of public parking spaces if those spaces were all made available. So I think there's things we have to do. Two last things as to a consensus. Consensus means 3 out of 5 votes. It doesn't mean we're going to keep everybody happy, but it means we're going to take some action. And I will be proposing things that we can take action on tonight, the next meeting, the meeting after that, until this commission decides they have a consensus to move forward on something. And last thing is, Mr. Mayor, don't ride around the neighborhood. Park. I heard that.
I missed it.
You had said that you often go down there and ride around the neighborhood to look at the conditions. It's not helping the conditions.
They call that cruising.
Mr. Mayor, if you'll allow me to just briefly describe.
I had one question for him as a follow-up, and then I'm gonna let you go in. So, you talk about the private spaces, and if we freed up those, help me understand, or maybe staff even. My understanding is, I mean, those are, we talked about the LDR requirements, and we've got that 50% reduction. So, I mean, are the private spaces not earmarked to, they're meeting the business's requirements to hit those spaces, right? So if we free those up, we're not creating parking magically, right?
Not necessarily. There's a couple properties down there that I've seen a chain across the vacant lot for the last 10 years, and I've really have only seen no cars in it. So those people are parking somewhere else. Off of Jasmine, there's a couple of them. And there's Peninsula and Flagler. There's a very nice business there, construction business. I've never seen more than 2 cars in their parking lot. If we would assist them in whatever they need in the way of some insurance for public parking, some type of signage, which you brought up, which is very important, perhaps we could add some spaces very economically.
All right, yeah, sorry.
And just the last thing is I listen to my people. I also listen to my training. I've had 40 years as an engineer designing these type of things. So we just got to do something.
Commissioner Sacks, sorry.
Let me just preface by saying there is no infinite abundance. We cannot keep creating more parking spots. And to walk in or to drive into Commissioner Colodey's zone, what I heard, and when I heard an elderly lady say she's worried that a fire truck or rescue cannot get to her house because of the traffic, that's a big problem for that zone, for the whole beach side. But when I talk about enforcement, there's low-hanging fruit there. The vehicles, the trucks and the cars that are parked illegally. We're not talking about marking tires. We're talking about cars that are parked on people's lawns, past the right-of-way onto their properties. We're talking about vehicles that are parked in the sidewalk. I see it all the time. We're talking about cars being parked willy-nilly everywhere. And that's what's going to keep happening, because we know we're a desirable place, but we need to make it nice for the people that live here. And somehow, I think starting to enforce will give us a flavor of where we might need to go. I do not support, I'll let it out now, I do not support parking meters, and I do not support a parking garage. And the surface lots, I did look at the surface lots. There may be a handful that would not be bothersome to the residents who live nearby those surface lots. And I wouldn't want anybody, overflow from surface lots might go into somebody's yard, so then we create another problem. So those are things I would discount, and that's a little more clarity on my position, I hope.
Okay. Other comments? So you are for the loading unloading zones and for enforcement. I'm trying to just kind of keep a running tally here so we kind of know where we got support. For loading unloading, for enforcement, not for metering, not for parking garages. And what about the shuttle? What are your thoughts on shuttle?
As long as the taxpayers don't have to foot the bill. If there was an overwhelming response that said residents want shuttles, I would gladly look at it myself. We have a shuttle, it's called Votran. Maybe we should get them engaged. We pay taxes for Votran, so.
But on the last parking study, that was part of that parking study, and I, along with 4 residents, did the trip, and it had such a negative impact on them, and even just trying to get that huge vehicle down some of these roads had all kinds of negative connotations. And they're going down residential streets. So to me, Votram is not an option. It needs to be a smaller vehicle. I think the little electric bus is the better way to go. Or, if we even do rickshaws, bike shaws, something like that. If we need to think,
pedicabs, I think.
Yeah, if we go along that lines, I think is better. But the Votram bus, we used the smallest bus they had, and the guy had trouble getting up and down the streets, So
I do agree with you.
So Votran's not the answer.
Votran is public transportation, and this is a very different usage, whether or not you support it or not, but Votran is not the answer in any shape, form, or fashion.
Okay, we can discount that. But let me tell you, the county helps create part of our problem with their visit New Smyrna Beach and the Ad Authority. So maybe we can enlist their help somehow to help us buy those mini buses. Volkswagen van with the surfboard on top.
Not above that, certainly if the county can step up. And they've supported many things like the beach ramp and everything else. So, other comments?
Yeah, I'm gonna go wade into these weeds here. Again, I think we owe the people some tangible, significant decision-making because we keep going over and over and over this. We've had task forces, we've had everything. The problem with enforcement is exactly what I was alluding to, which was Deb Dugas's problem. You're allowed to park in a right-of-way, which is the front of your house is a right-of-way. As long as there's 8 feet between the edge of your car and the center line, you're allowed to. So how do we fix that? We put up no parking signs. The problem was there was a lack of interest in doing that so the police chief could have the enforcement policies necessary to be able to enforce it. So what do I think about a electric trolley or something? I think it's a great idea, but our county council representative got us a grant for $500,000 and everybody showed up to these commissions saying, absolutely not. That's gone away now. Now we're talking about it again when I just watched it leave a funding source. I don't think a trolley type situation works other than when we have a unique situation where maybe some kind of holiday event or special situation or special event. I don't think it's going to affect the daily traffic and parking problem that we have day in and day out, at least not yet. So the parking garage. My understanding is we do not have enough room without the church property. Whether we lease it for a very long time or we bought it, I think the idea would be to buy it. But I think what we need to do is at least put on paper for the people where we stand with this, or at least where we're at with it. With respect to, we either can't do it because we don't have the property, or we can't do it because we don't have an interest in it. But we need to start putting some of these things to bed so the people aren't left out there wondering. And we're wondering too, the point I made in my first go around was we had 6, 7, 8 different people who came up and spoke with a different 6 or 7 different opinions on something. So it's very difficult for us to make decisions when everybody is so fractured on an issue. However, the parking garage seems to be the elephant in the room, and to my understanding, we can't do that unless and until we acquire more property. So to me, that's not an issue until we can actually go do that, and the church, to my understanding, has never been willing to sell us the property. So what else, Mayor? What else can I make a comment on?
Buying up surface level lots, thoughts on that?
Absolutely. We had a parking task force that recommended a revenue source to buy up some surface lots to be able to park at. St. Augustine does this. I don't recall, when I go to St. Augustine, it's mostly surface parking. I don't see big garages. Garages do have an issue. I see nothing wrong with the paid lots originated to be a revenue generator to buy up surface parking. But 2 things happen. Number 1, the county gave us the responsibility to maintain all the beach parking lots. So the money's getting funneled into there. The other issue is when it's your money, the citizens' money, and someone wants a significant more amount of money than what the appraised value comes back at, we're limited in what we can buy. So a private sector piece of property is going to sell for $1.5 million, but you get some appraiser that says it's worth $800,000. We can't ignore the appraiser and say we're going to pay $1.5 million. So we have looked at a lot of these issues and tried them. That doesn't mean we stop. But the surface lots, yes, I think we should go forward with securing and locking in a funding source and getting those properties where we can get them.
And loading, unloading zones, did you comment on that one?
Loading, unloading zones, yes, I think they're very important. However, we're going to need to get the buy-in with the commercial businesses. If we're the best thing, the Flagler Avenue. What are they called? The Flagler Avenue, not coalition, but
Business Association.
the Business Association. The importance of them working with us in an issue like this is critical. Because we're going to pass legislation, and then we're going to have this room filled up with a bunch of business people. So we do need loading and unloading zones. I recommend that. I have, in my own business, which I think I've mentioned before, I do key drops. Between midnight and 7 a.m. is when I make my deliveries happen. They're called key drops. They come in, everybody's got cameras these days. They come in, they drop it, they leave an invoice. If you have a problem when you come in, you call up your supplier, and they immediately take care of it. That is something that should be a no-brainer, but that is something that with all these small businesses, mom and pops, there's a tremendous upside. But one of the downsides is you have a lot of little individual personalities, and a lot of those people are going to disagree with wanting to do that. But we got to take them out of their comfort zone and have those delivery times more consistent, and that's something that we can do. Mike, I think that would be out of all the things I've heard, I think that is something that we can go forward with, which will be very tangible. I don't think it's going to solve the overall big problem, but it will certainly help the people and the residents who live in the area when they're trying to move around in their daily lives.
Okay. Commissioner Hartman, closing comments.
Signage,
Yes.
I think is very important. The surface lots, I'm in favor of, especially if we get the signage to where they're located and like that. I'm all in on the freight loading and unloading. My concern is the way it's currently configured is you have 5 of them going eastbound, but only 2 going westbound. So we would have to also maybe even consider a route designation so that the trucks don't get turned around and end up blocking roads, trying to get back to a loading or unloading zone. So that's going to need some work on it. Certainly we can do that. The shuttle, I think, I agree with you. We certainly can do a trial phase. I'm sure they would maybe even provide a vehicle for a short term to see if we're going to look at it, if we can lease one for a year and then see where we go from there. The problem with the grant that we had was it was tied to Votran, and there were so many negatives with the Votran. Part of that, I just couldn't support it. So that's why, I voted to turn the money back in. But I think that's it. Signage, freight, shuttle, and surface lots.
What if we had the shuttle driver writing parking tickets while they weren't driving? Check 2 boxes there, do some enforcement while they're...
Or could call in. Technology, with the parking meters and the technology, I think could solve a lot of problems because, in Orlando, if they have a parking meter, at 5 minutes, the meter reader guy gets a notification that the meter's fixing to run out. And, I've been caught numerous times, like 1 minute after my time with the parking ticket. So, there's all kinds of technology today that kind of encourage the people to move along, So I would certainly support that, but I do agree that we need to have a freebie window, for the day trippers or the day shoppers, and not necessarily the all-day trippers. So,
yeah,
I could certainly support meters. Whether we want to do one street or the other as a trial, see how it goes. We need to do something, and if we don't do anything, we'll never know if it'll work or not. So,
amen. So my final comments, and I hope Commissioner Colodi, sounds like you're going to try to run with this at our next meeting, so you can hopefully take notes on where there might be some support, because I agree. I think everyone has said it, and I said it at the meeting, and had some laughed at the Flagler meeting, but not doing anything is doing something. That's a conscious decision to not do anything. That's taking action. The action is that we've chosen to do nothing, and I think we're long past that. I think it's time to at least try some of these things. And the nice thing is, with the exception of the parking garage, really everything else is negligible call. Even the surface lots, we buy it. The market's been fairly hot, and over any 10-year horizon, I would be amazed if we managed to lose money on buying up property near oceans. I'd just be amazed. And so these are low risk things to me to at least try and see how they work. So on metering, the last thing I'd say on that, I think I made it pretty clear where I stand on all of these. I want to take action on them. The only thing I would say we punt a little bit is the parking garage. I don't think that we're going to have the support for it. I think it's going to be too contentious. I think it's too much money, and it's irreversible. So all the other ones, I think we could get some support for. That one is the sacrificial. We sacrifice that.
I did, yeah. I have some heartburn on the meters. I want to.
Okay.
I can't say right now I support the meters.
All right, and I don't know that there was I don't know where everybody's at on that one. I'm not saying everybody's in agreement on the rest. I'm saying for me, I want to be clear. With the exception of the parking garage, all the other ones: enforcement, surface level lots, updating LDRs, loading, unloading, shuttle as a trial period, and signage. I think we should try all of those in some form or fashion. And on metering, I want to be very clear. The idea is it's not a money maker. To me, it's about a way to maybe generate some revenue to pay for that enforcement. And the number two is it creates that turnover. It's not about trying to penalize people for coming to Flagler or Canal. It's about trying to encourage people to come to Flagler and Canal because they know there will be turnover of those spots. And right now, I don't think there's turnover there. And I'll tell you, I've heard that from a lot of the business owners up and down Flagler at least, but I've also heard the other as well. So that's one I'm not gonna push because it doesn't really impact me one or the other. So if we have a divided commission, divided community, I don't see a need to push that too much more. But it would enhance and it would make enforcement a lot. Otherwise, I don't know how we're going to enforce some of these things. So it would make enforcement a little bit easier. So that's It's kind of where I'm at. We've got a few more minutes if anybody has last closing
Yeah, I'd like
comments.
to, I'd like to bring up the issue. It's very complicated to understand the land development regulations based on parking. This is related to what Steve Welfer has been paying for parking spaces. The more that we have tried to put regulation and controls into the parking, I think the worse we've made it. I think it's one step forward, two steps back. And that goes back to the CRAs and lots of city-owned, and then they started charging for it. Going all the way back to 85, there's a lot of really good ideas that were put in place. They seemed good at the time, they seemed like they were going to work, but it's created all these little spokes and variables of little independent issues. And one of those is sitting right there. Steve Welfer had this problem for many years. He tried to secure something he wanted to build on his property. He had to secure parking spaces. He's been paying into a parking space fund. Hasn't been able to get the business up. But this idea of parking spaces and multiple people pay into the same spot, there's a lot there. So I think one of the issues that we should try to tackle before the year's end is to figure out how we deal with that, and that goes into paying. How do we pay for picking up surface parking, which is a business that gets allocated. If you have a real estate office, you may need 3 or 4 parking spaces. If you're a restaurant, you may need 30 or 40 parking spaces, and there's a number associated with that parking space that you then pay into the city as a fund to help secure surface parking in the area. So it's actually a pretty interesting strategy. It's not exactly, but places like the Pavilion, a lot of places do a 1% tax, but that wasn't equitable when you have service sector like insurance or real estate with places like bars or restaurants. So I think we have a revenue generating source there, and I think it would clean up all the confusion with the whole parking regulations. I don't believe in any way it'll make the parking worse, and I think in the long term, it'll generate money to pick up additional parking as we could with the surface parking. So that's something that doesn't need to be dealt with today or tomorrow, but I would like that to be on the commission's radar to start a discussion on.
Okay. Last 2 things I just saw in my notes here. The idea about the ramp, obviously the ramp that was fault by some of the residents in the area that was going to impact their residential area, we all can relate to that. We all have an element of, not in my backyard in us. But the idea of, the gentleman who spoke was right. There are some approaches that would be between, condos, which much, much lower resident impact could possibly help alleviate some of these traffic things. So I don't know if that's been looked at or studied before. I don't know why we picked the spots we picked versus looking at some of those opportunities, but that's certainly something, I don't see downside to.
Yeah, some of the history on that is, the county heard us. We were saying we need help.
Yeah.
So and they heard there wasn't some opinions that we should open up more sites, more ingress and egress from the beach. So the county went ahead to do that, and then they got tremendous pushback. So they're cranky with us now for something we started.
But why? But I guess the question is, who picked the spots? If we identified a spot that there weren't residents on both sides to fight it, then could we have gotten a little more traction?
So there's not a lot of spots that say have condos on both sides.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is it ended up being not just this is my house is next to the ramp. It ended up I don't want the traffic in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So North Beach, we have Crawford, thank you. We have Crawford, we have Beachway. To open up more and more often there, the whole North Beach was not happy with that.
Yeah.
So, and then when we went south, Jay can speak to some of that. That wasn't, the most vocal was the person who lived on either side of it. But that was by no sense of the imagination. Hill Street basically was the traffic in the
neighborhood.
It's a lot of challenge. And that was us. One of the things I want to stress is we pushed that. The county responded, and then the pushback was so great, we said, never mind. And the county was not happy about that, so.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson that I think we'll touch on at 6:30 to make sure we don't push things all the way to the county before we've really involved the locals that it's going to impact. So we'll talk about that at 6:30, I'm sure. All right, gentlemen, with that, we have another meeting at 5:30 for the public, so just so you know, the rest of the evening, we got a 5:30 meeting. You're welcome to stick around for a Community Redevelopment Agency. Should take approximately, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, maybe, usually. And then at 6:30 is our regularly scheduled meeting. So if you don't want to stay for the CRA, you got an hour or so to go grab some dinner at one of our great local restaurants. And we'll be back at 6:30, and you may hear more about some of these items and everything else on the agenda. With that, this meeting is adjourned.